Welcome to Family History Mysteries, a podcast that tells the stories uncovered through family history research, the unexpected stories of everyday people. I am an avid family historian who has been compiling my family tree for over 15 years, with nearly 20,000 people recorded in my trees. And please put a review on my podcast. That will certainly help in getting the word out there and creating more listenership. Episode 253. Joseph Hawdon and Charles Bonney, Part 2. And Charles Bonney, he was born on the 31st of October 1813 in Sandon, England. He was the son of the rector of the Sandon Church. In 1826, after his father died, he moved to Ridgeley Grammar School where his brother Thomas was headmaster. In August 1834, at the age of 21, he sailed for Australia on the John Craig, taking up a position as a clerk for Judge William Burton at the Sydney Supreme Court. He stayed in Burton's employ for about 19 months. Burton was a presiding judge at the second trial of the men accused of killing 28 unarmed Aboriginal people in the Mile Creek Massacre on the 10th of June 1838. A group of landowners funded a formidable defence team to represent the accused on trial that became known as the Black Association and allegedly set out on a program of intimidation and advised jurors to absent themselves from court. The defendant's counsel advised his clients to remain silent or deny knowledge of the murders during the trial. Despite damning evidence presented, the jury declared all 11 defendants not guilty after less than 20 minutes deliberation. A second trial took place, presided over by Judge Burton, which saw many of the men called for jury service fail to appear. When the trial finally took place, the jury just took 1 hour to deliberate. The foreman announced that the verdict was not guilty. However, one of the jurors immediately informed the court that the foreman had delivered the wrong verdict and the correct verdict was guilty. An inquiry took place again, presided over by Judge Burton, and finally the guilty verdict was upheld. It was not a popular verdict, but Judge Burton said the crime was committed in the sight of God and the blood of the victims cried for vengeance. All 7 prisoners received the death penalty, and on the 18th of December 1838, the condemned men were executed by hanging at the Sydney jail. Judge Burton went against public opinion when he pushed for a guilty verdict, and it should be noted that this was the first time white men were condemned for killing blacks. Perhaps Burton and Bonney's abhorrence of violence is what brought them together. Burton and Bonney's names are linked to holding a Kilmore run in 1837. Bonney resigned his position midway through 1836 to help Charles Hodson Ebden set up Ebden's new pastoral runs near Albury on the Murray River. Bonney left Sydney in the July to help Ebden manage his stations, Mungabarina and Bonegella. A short time later, Bonney was sent to search for an overland cattle route to Melbourne, but being a wet spring, the Ovens River was in flood and he couldn't get across. On the way, he found the tree that Hume marked on the Murray River. He returned to Ebden's sheep run where shearing was in progress. A second attempt to find a route to Melbourne was commenced on Christmas Day 1836 with a bullock dray and 7 men. Some accounts place Ebden and Bonney on this second journey that was completed on the 7th of January 1837 when the party arrived in Melbourne, just days behind John Gardner, Joseph Hawdon and John Hepburn, the first to bring cattle overland from New South Wales. He described Melbourne at the time as a few tents with one newly erected weatherboard store conspicuous by its fresh coat of paint amongst the ruder habitations by which it was surrounded. Bonney returned to Sydney by ship and headed overland to meet up with Ebden again. On the 1st of March 1837, Ebden and Bonney drove 10,000 sheep from Mungabarina Station on the Murray and reached Sugarloaf Creek, a tributary of the Goulburn River, on the 14th of March. During the journey, one of Ebden's shepherds, George Comerford, asked Bonney for alms, as he'd heard about tales of how dangerous the blacks could be towards travellers. And this was covered in more detail in episode 241, as George Comerford became one of the first Victorian bushrangers. When they reached Sugarloaf Creek near Kilmore, Ebden gave Bonney 1,000 sheep and some men and left him there to set up a station. Ebden then continued on with 9,000 sheep to set up at Carlsruhe Station, arriving there on the 26th of May 1837. After the long journey, Charles Bonney was in need of supplies, and he started out with the drays for the settlement. On this journey, he made a track that's now known as Sydney Road and discovered Fertile District, named afterwards as Kilmore, where he formed a sheep station. Bonney, however, found that he was desperately short of workers. He became despondent of his situation and sent one of the flocks back to Ebden at Carlsruhe. The rest he moved on to Kilmore, where he remained until the end of 1837. Bonney later wrote, "Being the farthest out station from the Port Phillip settlement and being no other station within a distance of nearly 20 miles, I found the difficulty of managing the sheep so great in consequence of the trouble I had in getting men that I gave up the station and took the sheep to Mount Macedon." After the expedition with Hawdon in 1838, early in the May, Bonney left in the Waterwitch for Melbourne, and since there was no chart, he was the only one on board to ever enter Port Phillip Bay. He acted as pilot. On arriving in Melbourne, Bonney was subpoenaed to Sydney to be a witness at Comerford's murder trial. Bonney joined other witnesses on a ship and set sail for Sydney in May 1838. Bonney had to wait several weeks for a summons that never came. He stayed at Camden during this time and wrote that during a great drought, although it was winter, the ground was brown and bare as the middle of the road. Bonney then travelled to Howlong, Hawdon Station on the Murray River, in early February 1839, and then Bonney was ready for a second journey to South Australia. On the 24th of June 1839 in the Sydney Herald, it outlined his journey from Portland Bay to South Australia. Mr. Bonney left Mr. Henty's of Portland Bay, a new station on the Glenelg, on the 18th of March with 10 men and 2 native boys of the Bathurst district, 2 drays and 300 head of cattle. Mr. Bonney travelled 2 days to the southward of west over a mass of swamps stretched occasionally across 10 miles. The swamps themselves are covered with rushes and at present are for the most part dry on the surface, but on all fresh water that could be obtained by digging a few feet. Expecting this country to extend to the northward, Mr. Bonney changed his course to northwest, but after 4 or 5 days' travel, found the country changed its character and the swamps failed to supply a sufficient amount of water for the cattle. He turned off towards the coast and in a few hours came to extensive swamps running close under a limestone ridge, which appeared to lie in parallel with the coast at a distance of 5 or 6 miles from the shore. Here water was in abundance and with plenty of feed. The next day, proceeding in the direction of the coast, keeping the limestone ridge to the left, Mr. Bonney came across a large freshwater lake 12 miles in length and 4 miles in breadth. He named it after his friend, Lake Hawdon. The lake is situated in the centre of a very extensive swamp, though which there being great difficulty in getting the drays, the party skirted the edge and fell in with firmer ground. On leaving the lake, the swamps ceased for some time, and the party travelled for about 10 miles through dense forest, in some places of scrubby grass tree and in others of she oak, when they again came upon a swamp with good water found by digging. The swamp here was scarcely foot deep, covered in decomposed limestone, though it was necessary to dig to find water. The depth required was 4 or 5 feet, but by the morning the hole was filled with 3 feet of the surface. On the day following, Mr. Bonney unexpectedly struck a bay a little to the northward of Cape Bernoulli. The cattle had now been without water for 2 days, and the weather being oppressively hot, the party halted and endeavoured to procure it near the sandhills. Water was found in abundance in one instance within 6 inches of the surface, but it was not practicable to water the cattle sufficiently in this manner from their treading on the sand into the water trenches as fast as the men could clear them out. The weather suddenly changed from extreme heat to cold and showery. Mr. Bonney determined, though still at a distance of 100 miles from the easterly point of Lake Alexandrina, to make an effort to reach it. He accordingly directed the party to proceed by the borders of the dry swamp, which divided the beach by the sand ridge running close to the shore. The ridge was covered with she oak and produced excellent grass, which, with the cold weather, enabled the cattle to travel without water during the 3 days they continued in this route. On the 4th day, having made in that time about 50 miles, the party left the swamps, finding them bearing more to the westward and being occasionally under salt water. The country now entered upon was sandhills covered with low brush and was occasionally intersected by narrow swamps, in one of which a watercourse was found where a hole of water so extremely brackish was totally unfit for human use. The cattle, however, drank it with avidity, and some of the horses also got at it. Water, however, sufficiently palatable for use was obtained by digging about 3 feet in the watercourse. The party was now within 45 miles of the lake, and Mr. Bonney hoped to reach it without difficulty, but the next day it became so excessively hot that in travelling 8 miles, 3 horses and several head of cattle gave in exhausted, probably owing to having drank too much brackish water at the last resting place. The working bullocks also failed, though the party had rested during the heat of the day. It was not evident that the herd could be taken forward in mass, and Mr. Bonney therefore took the resolution to proceed with the main body of the cattle, leaving the weekly portion to be taken back to the last watering place, directing the men left in charge to dig holes sufficiently large for the cattle to obtain good water. The drays were left where the working bullocks gave up, in charge of 3 of the men. Mr. Bonney, accompanied by 4 men and 2 native boys, started by moonlight and travelled 18 miles in a northerly direction over barren, sandy country covered with low brush. During the heat of the day, while the party rested, Mr. Bonney walked to a somewhat high sandhill, from which he saw, as he imagined, water 10 miles to the west. In the evening, the party started in the direction of the water, but after travelling 12 to 14 miles and not reaching it, they rested till daylight when no appearance of water in any direction could be observed. The course was now altered to the northwest, and Mr. Bonney judged by the appearance of the country that it was still to the eastward of the lake. The whole party were nearly exhausted for want of water and obliged to rest owing to the heat almost every 2 miles. In a few hours, Mr. Bonney described in the distance a timbered ridge, and more joyful than all, the native fires evidently marked his proximity to the lake. At this time the party were forced to walk, the horses scarcely able to crawl. One of the men, who was extremely ill, mounted, but the horse fell down under his weight, and on mounting another horse, the man became too ill to proceed further. The party therefore halted till the cool of the evening upon a plain covered with white sand, without bush or shade of any kind. In the evening the thirst of the party became unsupportable. Mr. Bonney directed a calf to be killed, the blood of which was drank by all but 1 man. The party lay down to rest, and in about an hour and a half Mr. Bonney arose considerably refreshed and observed the cattle drawing off in the direction he wished to proceed. In about 2 hours the men were awoke and collected the horses and straggling cattle that remained and followed the track of the main herd, continuing in a northwest direction. The cattle had evidently, with instinct peculiar to the animals, smelt the water of the lake 9 miles distant, though it was not until sunrise that the proximity of the lake was observed, the shores being surrounded with high reeds. The water was not perfectly fresh at this spot. The shores here extend to the southward at a considerable distance, and about 6 miles to the west they contract to a narrow creek, connecting it to the main lake. Mr. Bonney returned the next day to the dray, a distance in a direct line of 37 miles, and in a couple of days more they were also brought up to the lake. The distance between Mr. Henty's station and the lake in a direct line was 250 miles, performed in 19 days. The herd having now rested 10 days, Mr. Bonney proceeded in a northerly direction over a sandy ridge, and at a distance of 8 miles came upon a point of the main lake, the water which was perfectly fresh. The shores were covered in reedy flats, which were in some places a mile in breadth. In a few hours more they found the entrance of the Murray to the lake. The valley of the Murray at this point was a mile in width and consisted of reedy flats, with water nearly on a level with the banks. The party now followed up the river, where Mr. Bonney determined to attempt a passage of the river at the spot where it was contracted to the breadth of 145 yards. It was evidently accomplished with some difficulty on account of the steepness of the banks on either side. The herd then passed through dead scrub for about 14 miles, and Mr. Bonney left it in good condition on the fertile pastures of Mount Barker. The number of cattle missing and left behind was 23. Mr. Bonney states, notwithstanding the difficulties he encountered, and which he considers inseparable from the first attempt, that the route thus he opened between Portland Bay and South Australia must become the high road from New South Wales. Independent of the vast saving in the distance, he has no doubt, on a more careful examination of the country, a safe and well-watered route could be found, over which it would be practicable to bring stock and sheep to South Australia all seasons of the year. As a result of the journey, the shipping of sheep from Melbourne and Tasmania ceased, the land route being taken instead. Bonney spent some years in South Australia. Mr. Bonney was asked to accompany Major O'Halloran's punitive expedition against the murderers of the crew and passengers of the schooner Maria. Almost 40 natives were captured and 2 were hanged, but returned to Port Phillip in about April 1841 to take up a station, again at the Murray, in partnership with his old friend Ebden. When this venture failed early in 1842 during a period of depression, leading to cattle becoming almost unsaleable, Bonney gladly accepted an offer from Governor George Grey to become a Commissioner of Crown Lands in South Australia. He left Port Phillip on the Iona and took office in the May, and his appointment was confirmed in the November. His main task was to define the boundaries of pastoral leases, which until then had been described haphazardly. In this office he was so successful that in 1854 some Crown tenants in the southeast of the colony presented him with £700 as a mark of esteem.
He married Charlotte Heritage on the 13th of December 1846 in Adelaide when he was 33 and Charlotte 19. Charlotte was born in Gloucestershire, England. They had 9 children, with 6 surviving infancy. The first 7 children were born in South Australia. They went to England in 1858, where one child was born in 1859, and returned to South Australia by 1861, when their youngest child was born. He was then a member of the House of Assembly for East Torrens. He resigned his seat on the 26th of January 1858 and remained out of Parliament till March 1865, when he was elected to the Legislative Council, but in the following year resigned his place in the Upper House. For many years, Mr. Bonney resided in Sydney and was the last pioneer receiving a pension under the Constitution Act, the annual amount £250. He'd been afflicted with blindness for some years. He died on the 15th of March 1897. Bonney belonged to the best type of pioneer. He quickly adapted himself to the conditions of the new country. He was an excellent explorer and understood how to keep the Aborigines in good humour. In later years, he was a successful public official, held in great respect by the people of Adelaide. He was respected for his honesty and practical ability. He was a capable and intelligent bushman with a wide knowledge of Australian geography, which was recognised when he was elected as a Fellow of the Royal Geographical Society in 1861. His name is commemorated in a creek named by John McDougall Stewart, the explorer, and a lake named by Hawdon. There's a monument that was erected at Shepparton, saying Joseph Hawdon and Charles Bonney, the first white men to visit this district, camped near this spot on the 13th of January 1838. And this is when they camped on the Goulburn River while overlanding cattle from Albury to Adelaide. In the Shepparton Advertiser on the 25th of March 1936, Tribute to Pioneers, Unveiling of Cairn Today. Senator Major General Brand will perform a ceremony of great interest to all residents of the Shepparton district this afternoon when he unveils the cairn at the entrance to Lake Victoria in memory of Joseph Hawdon and Charles Bonney, the first white men to enter the district. It is interesting to learn that Shepparton's district might have been discovered much earlier had the whim of one explorer not been sustained. Hume and Hovell were the first to set out from New South Wales for the seaboard of Victoria. Early in the 19th century, they left Albury, passing through Yea and reached the southern coast. Hovell wanted to explore the lower-lying pasture land to the west, but Hume favoured the rough mountainous country. Had Hovell had his way, the Shepparton district would have been explored 11 or 12 years earlier than it was. Major Sir Thomas Mitchell was the first man to enter the Goulburn Valley. In 1835, he passed a place called Violet Ponds, now known as Violet Town. While at Seymour, this explorer said he considered the Goulburn ran into the Murray in the Swan Hill district. He little suspected the river ran almost due north through fertile country. There's also commemorative plaques placed at Wentworth and Echuca. Charles Bonney's children. Charles George Bonney was born on the 25th of October 1847 in Parkside, South Australia. He married Jane Elizabeth Goddard Everett on the 16th of October 1879 at St Luke's Parsonage in Adelaide when he was 31. They had 2 children, one in 1880 and one in 1882, both born in Cranbourne, Victoria. In the Government Gazette on the 21st of August 1875 in the Adelaide Observer, Mr Charles George Bonney to be clerk, 5th class, in the office of the Inspector and Valuator of Lands. And on the 24th of September 1881 in the Adelaide South Australian Weekly Chronicle, J. Cherry versus C. J. Chester, £39 for illegal conversion of goods. Plaintiff set forth his plea that he is the official assignee of the estate and effects of Charles George Bonney, late of Adelaide, an insolvent debtor. The second child, Charlotte Agnes Bonney, was born on the 6th of August 1849 at Norwood, South Australia, and she died on the 7th of November 1915 in Moreland, Victoria, aged 66. Charlotte did not marry. The third child was Arthur Edwin Bonney, who was born on the 4th of May 1851 in Norwood, South Australia. He married Alice Emily Meredith on the 23rd of October 1878 in Glenelg, South Australia, when he was 27 and Alice 24. They had no children, and he died on the 8th of June 1933 in North Adelaide, aged 82. The next child was John Augustus Bonney. He was born on the 2nd of February 1853 in Norwood and died on the 14th of March 1853. The fifth child was Ernest Augustus Bonney, who was born on the 16th of August 1854 in Norwood, South Australia. He married Mary Henrietta Ickerson, known as Minnie, on the 14th of April 1882 in Glebe, New South Wales. They had 2 sons. It stated in 1886 that they lived at Longueville at Lane Cove River. In December 1907, in the New South Wales Police Gazette, notice is hereby given that the partnership between Ernest Augustus Bonney and Frederick Rupert Hardy as licensed surveyors in Sydney, under the style of the firm Bonney and Hardy, was dissolved on the 30th of November by mutual consent, Ernest Augustus Bonney retiring from the firm. And he died on the 25th of November 1914 in Chatswood, New South Wales, aged 60. The next child was Laura May Bonney, who was born on the 2nd of May 1856 in Norwood, South Australia. She died on the 31st of October 1858 in Clapham, London, England. The seventh child, Florence Adelaide, was born on the 7th of January 1858 in Norwood, New South Wales. On the 6th of January 1890 in the Sydney Evening News. Words of Light by Florence Adelaide Bonney, Turner and Henderson, Sydney. This is a volume of short, sentimental poems descriptive of moral and religious thoughts and feelings. The writer of these poems seems to be a very model of purity, good temper and kindness. Her poems are nearly all written in the same metre, and as they are very numerous, there are sure to be some of them below mediocrity, while others may possibly rise a little above it. Indeed, several pieces are not without merit. She did not marry and died on the 24th of April 1939 in Wallara, New South Wales, aged 81. The eighth child was Constance Eleanor Bonney, who was born on the 14th of July 1859 at Lichfield, Staffordshire, England. On the 5th of September 1900 in the Sydney Daily Telegraph, she wrote a letter to the editor. Sir, Mr. Gandon, like many others, fails to my mind to give one really good reason why women should not have a political vote. To try and support his views, he quotes from the opinions of others, one of which required to study grammar before giving attention to women's suffrage. I am surprised that a clever man like Herbert Spencer should think that the spheres of men and women should be kept distinct. Who is to say which is the woman's sphere and which is the men's? At one time it was not considered to be a woman's sphere to study and to take a medical degree, but now we can only admire those who have the ability to do so. With the march of progress, the spheres of men and women merge more and more together until they stand side by side, each trying to help in the difficulty problems of life. In the East, we have the other extreme, where the spheres of each are kept wide apart, the result of being a state of stagnation. I certainly think that the granting of the suffrage to women will widen their sphere and therefore be a benefit to themselves as well as the whole community. I should like to ask Mr. Gandon if he has any authority for saying that the great majority of women do not want to vote. Mr. Gandon says a number of members who voted against sending the question to the referendum and are known to have pledged themselves to support the bill have assured he personally that they do not believe in women having a vote. But not one of these was candid enough to admit the women are sure to get it, and then where we will be at in the next election if we oppose them now. But if, as Mr. Gandon says, the great majority of women do not want to vote, why should members be afraid of the women at the next election if they oppose the women's suffrage bill? In conclusion, I wish to state that it gave me much pleasure to read the article in your paper in support of women's suffrage. Yours, Constance E. Bonney of Wallara. On the 22nd of May 1916 in the Sydney Sun, tonight, public meeting by Peace Society in celebration of First Hague Conference in Royal Society's Hall in Elizabeth Street. Speakers are listed and it says everyone's welcome, Constance E. Bonney, Honorary Secretary. Constance did not marry and died in Wallara, Sydney on the 11th of October 1935. On the 16th of October 1935, her probate was advertised in the Sydney Morning Herald. In the will and codicil of Constance Eleanor Bonney, Lady of Wallara, spinster, deceased, may be granted to Reginald Schofield Bonney and John Melbourne Morn, executors of the will. Reginald Schofield Bonney was Ernest's son and he was a judge in the Supreme Court. Their ninth child, Percival Harold, was born on the 19th of August 1861 in Adelaide and died on the 7th of December 1863 in Parkside, South Australia. Charles's nephews, Edward and Frederick, were encouraged by Charles to come out to Australia and follow in his footsteps in the 1860s and emigrated. The brothers were the son of Reverend Thomas Bonney, who was the headmaster at Rugeley Grammar School, who Charles stayed with after their father's death. They had another brother, Thomas George Bonney, who was an academic geologist. Edward was born in 1838. Frederick was born in 1842 and emigrated with Edward. The brothers ran the biggest station known in New South Wales at that time, called Moomba, on the Darling River near Wilcannia. In the 1860s, it was 6,000 square kilometres. In episode 26, I outlined two of Charles Dickens's sons that came out to Australia. One of those sons, his nickname being Plawn, was sent out by his father to Momba Station. He arrived a few days before his 16th birthday in 1868 and worked as a stockman at Momba until 1872. Frederick was a photographer. He took photographs at Momba Station in the 1870s and was known for these in his anthropology. Frederick used cutting-edge photographic techniques. He had a great regard for Aborigines who lived and worked on Momba Station. He studied their rituals and lifestyles and made copious notes and recorded them in photographs. His collection of photographs are considered to be some of the earliest taken of Aboriginals of New South Wales. He took many pictures of the Pakanchi people who traditionally lived along the Paroo River. These people have been devastated by disease and the invasion by foreign immigrants. Bonney's attitude to these people was not as judgmental as many, and he took natural pictures which recorded their lives. He was shocked by the racist views of others, and he recorded his respect for the loyal and integrity of the native Australians. They were exhibited at the Melbourne exhibition in 1880. Bonney's pictures of Wonko Mary record a mourning tradition. Wonko Mary is shown with a widow's cap, which she's made from gypsum and water and moulded on her head. Edward became ill with terminal syphilis and returned back home in 1879. Frederick had to tidy up their affairs, but he also took the opportunity to complete his anthropological and photographic studies. Frederick sold Momba Station and returned to Staffordshire in 1881. He travelled back the long way and visited Hawaii, where he again took photographs during a month's stay there. Edward did not marry and died in 1883 in England, aged just 45. The Hay Riverine grazier on the 11th of July 1883 outlined his death. One of the oldest pioneers of this part of the Darling has joined the great majority. Mr. Edward Smith Bonney died at Rugeley, Staffordshire on the 15th of May at 45 years of age. There are few names mentioned in this part of the colony with so much respect as that of Mr. Bonney, and although he departed forever, his many good deeds will continue to keep his memory green. He was the son of an English church clergyman and, like many English gentlemen of enterprise, came out to Australia. He took up an abode on Mount Murchison Station to gain colonial experience. There was no Wilcannia in those days, and Mount Murchison was the one great landmark on this part of the Darling. It did not require a man of Mr. Bonney's perception and energy to be long in the country to acquire knowledge of that somewhat indefinable something called the colonial experience. Accordingly, his experienced days at Mount Murchison were soon ended by his pushing out and forming what is known as Momba Station. This was a speculation between himself and Mr. Myers, the managers being R. Smith and Co. of Mount Murchison. For several years, the young pioneer met with fairly good success. 1875 was one of the worst ever experienced on the Darling, the rainfall being only a few decimals over 5 inches during 12 months. Few squatters recovered the heavy loss of stock by the drought. It was then a gloomy time for the owners of Momba, who must have lost from 30 to 40,000 sheep by the drought. Indeed, things were so bad that Mr. Bonney offered on several occasions to turn over his interest on Momba for a £50 note and a couple of horses. But he still plodded on, and by unswerving energy, his affairs commenced to show signs of improvement. Soon afterwards, his partner, Mr. Myers, died when Mr. James McCulloch, now Sir James McCulloch, and R. Smith purchased an interest in the Momba property. Mr. Bonney continued to manage the station for some time afterwards, and also the Mount Murchison run that adjoined it. Hard work and anxiety has been for some time undermining his constitution, and his health commenced to give way. It was then thought advisable that he should return to England, and he sold out the Momba Pastoral Company in 1878. It is about 4 years since he returned to England, and we're informed that at no time during that period his health had any way improved. Mr. Bonney possessed all those traits of character which make a man loved as well as respected. He was manly and frank and of a most engaging manner, and generous almost to a fault in money matters. His name was at the head of every subscription list got up for a good purpose. To the building fund of our neat little church, which has just been finished, he was the donor to the extent of £250. He spent the best part of his life in this locality, and it is no small thing to say of a man meeting with all classes, as he had occasion to do, that no one was ever heard to say an unkind word of him. And that was originally published in the Wilcannia Times. The will of Edward Smith Bonney, formerly of Momba, River Darling, in the colony of New South Wales and late of Rugeley in the county of Stafford, gentleman, who died on the 15th of May 1883 at Rugeley, was proved at Lichfield by Frederick Bonney of Rugeley, the brother of the sole executor. Once Frederick returned to his home, he bought Colton House in Ridgely. He established gardens and an arboretum at his house. He continued to record local events using photography. Many of these pictures are held in a collection at Colton House. He became chair of the parish council and bred show pigeons. Bonney also volunteered to manage his local hospital and village reading room. And on the 28th of April 1897, in the Wilcannia Western Grazier, the residence of Frederick Bonney, Esquire. We are indebted to Mr. Brown for perusal of a copy of the Ridgely Mercury, received by him on the last mail by Mr. Frederick Bonney, late of Momba. The paper contains a photograph of Mr. Bonney and his residence, and a description may be of interest to Mr. Bonney's many friends in this district. Colton House and the adjacent grounds possess an individuality of their own which cannot fail to strike the beholder. The house itself faces a high road and is at present occupied by Frederick Bonney, Esquire, a prominent member of the Ridgely Bench of Magistrates. It is one of those old-fashioned places of residence which are to be found scattered throughout the country, but which have a homely appearance about them. Mr. Bonney has greatly improved the general appearance of the house and grounds, which are now regarded with considerable interest by all that visit them. At the east end of the house is a coach house, stables and other offices, whilst at the back are extensive grounds beautifully laid out and presenting a constant round of attraction. Mr. Bonney is well known all over the district for his great love of flowers, and his gardens in the summertime are regarded with the greatest amount of interest. Mr. Bonney's Australian experiences of borne fruit, the enjoyment of which he is always ready to share with his friends and neighbours. He shows unique pictures and photographs relating to Aboriginal life and adventure, and is never weary of exhibiting the name and recounting faces and stories with interest. His collection of curiosities is equally profuse and worthy of examination. Everyone visiting the village will notice the large red brick house facing the roadway, but they will hardly dream of the interest which attaches to it. Mr. Bonney is justly very popular in the village in which he has made his home, and whatever may be the future of Colton House, its existing characteristics will not be readily forgotten. On the 22nd of July 1903 in the Wilcannia Western Grazier, Mr. F. Bonney. All old residents will remember Mr. Frederick Bonney, a gentleman closely identified with Wilcannia and districts in the 1870s, will read with interest the clipping from the Ridgely Mercury. Although more than 20 years has elapsed since his departure from Wilcannia, his interest in the Queen's city and her welfare is as keen as ever, and he has on more than one occasion within our own recollections given practical proof of his goodwill, notably with the hospital. In connection with the removal of Mr. F. Bonney from Colton, who's lately taken up his residence in Church Street, Ridgely, a public presentation was made to the gentleman last Friday in the Colton Reading Room, on behalf of the members of the parish council and other friends in the village, presenting Mr. Bonney with a silver tea service. On the 3rd of April 1915, in the Wilcannia Western Grazier, a letter has been received from Mr. Frederick Bonney, formerly for 15 years a resident at Momba Station, which he left in 1881 and is now living in England. Mr. Bonney writes, I have read with much pleasure in your Western Grazier reports from your far-back township, Milparinka, and surrounding district, the very creditable enthusiasm with which the inhabitants have joined in helping the Patriotic Fund, and to tell you how much those efforts in so distant a part of the Empire are appreciated. This is another example of welding together of the scattered races of the Empire, which the war has brought about in sympathy for the upholding of a truer civilization of the world's people and lasting peace. Some of Frederick's original photographic images have been lost, but his work has been published in 2 books, and they include the photographs of the Pakanchi people. Unusually for his time, he wrote the people's names on the back of his photographs, and these can be cross-referenced to his notebooks. This information can reveal connections to the Pakanchi people living today. His photographs are held in the State Library of New South Wales and the Mitchell Library, and the Australian National Library, and Colton House holds another collection. His collection of Australian artefacts were kept at his house in England, and some of these later went to collections at the University of Cambridge. Bonney's important manuscript notebooks and a copy of his published article on some customs of the Aborigines of the River Darling, New South Wales, were donated to the Mitchell Library in 1924, and this paper is still cited when researching Aboriginal customs. A book, People of the Paroo, by Jeanette Hope and Robert Lindsay, has been published that contains all Bonney's surviving Australian pictures. Some of these have only recently been identified. Frederick died in 1921 in Ridgely, Staffordshire, England. On the 3rd of November 1922, There was an advertisement in the Supreme Court of New South Wales of probate jurisdiction on Frederick Bonney, late of Rugeley in the county of Stafford in England, Esquire, deceased. The probate be granted to Thomas George Bonney and Alice Jane Weatherall, the executors, and they were his brother and sister. So I hope you enjoyed the story of Joseph Hawdon and Charles Bonney, who opened up such important land in such an early time of Australia's history.
If you are interested in sharing your story on my podcast, Family History Mysteries, please go to my Facebook page and send me a message. If you would like some assistance in filling in the gaps in your family tree to see what mysteries you solve, please get in touch. And don't forget, you can have early access to episodes by subscribing, and you'll also gain access to bonus episodes.